Hi, I am here with Rhonda and Angus. Rhonda from Practical Steiner and Angus from The Exceptional State. Rhonda's on Substack, Angus is on YouTube and Substack under that name, and we have been having these ongoing conversations about abstract thinking, living thinking, dead thinking, and pure thinking. And we've been struggling with this in a whole series of private conversations. And so now that we've spent our time working through these ideas in private, we're going to post a little recording where I'm going to ask some questions of each of my friends, and we will try to tease out what we understand today. So, to start with, this conversation was inspired by the fact that Rhonda has, who's a close friend of mine, and we do a lot of podcasts and recordings together. She has expressed an aversion to abstract thinking, which I share too in the general kind of how it's used in the modern world. And we all study Rudolf Steiner's work, and Rudolf Steiner has said many times things about abstract thinking. So, in one of our conversations with Angus, who we know more newly, Angus is in Sweden, um, he mentioned, but you have to read GA 215, which is Philosophy, Cosmology, and Religion, specifically the second lecture. And it pulls out this definition and purpose for abstract thinking that I thought was amazing. And so, Angus, will you try to explain what you understood from GA 215?
Wow. Well, first of all, I mean, one of the things that you did for me, which I hadn't associated before, is you pointed out like this confusing phrase that he was equating abstract thinking to pure thinking. And I'd never sort of like seen it that clearly before. And for those who want to dig into it, it's the second lecture of 215. And actually, that part has been pulled in the written version, which is GA25. So, GA25, which is identical content, but is a cleaned up, a rewritten version of the transcript because it was performed in France. So that's actually been removed. But nevertheless, like your sharp eyes made me think I've got to revisit this because obviously Steiner mentions pure thinking in the philosophy of freedom, which is it's like a particular field of interest for me, and it opened up a perspective. It clarified, I think, for me, and I'm going to try and explain how it clarified for me. It's like this relationship. What is abstract thinking? Why is it so essential? Which will then lead us into either the positive or the negative aspects of it. So, and we did actually touch on this very briefly in a prior conversation when I pointed out that in the original preface to the philosophy of freedom, Steiner mentions this idea that we have to live intensively with abstract thinkings and then bring them into the ethereal realm. Can't remember the words exactly, but it's that idea. And it's really strange, like ethereal, Steiner in his philosophy days, there's like there's a mismatch there.
Mm.
But really, he is pointing to something it's like really important, and it's like more or less in the dead center of that of the original preface, which also has as like a certain significance as well. So, what is he saying both in 215, which is called Philosophy, Cosmology, and Religion? What he's saying is that if we look at where true philosophy arose from, it was from a living philosophy. Yeah. Where do we see evidence of it? Well, actually, it's in the Greeks, who were capable of still thinking in the etheric body and not in the physical body, or using the physical brain as the reflector that we do now. So in 215, there's one or two assertions in there that are key. We as modern people think with our physical brains in general. That, per definition, is dead abstract thinking. That the fact that it is abstract per se doesn't make it bad. It's a statement of fact. When we, it's like through meditation, concentration exercises, we re-achieve imaginative consciousness. What we are starting to do again is to think consciously in the etheric realm, to experience living thoughts. So let's characterize a little bit what the difference between living and dead thoughts. It's actually fairly simple. That a dead thought is something that no longer has the compelling power of the spirit. So a thought can no longer compel you in the same way. So if we look back, it's like pre-Socratic literature, Homer or someone like that, you'll get hundreds and hundreds of examples where it's like the actors in the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's like the gods enter into them. It's like into their Phrenes, into their Menos, or into their Hecacore, bodily parts. They intervene with their thought, and the hero has to obey. There is no free will there because like the will is in the thought. So one of the things that we've acquired through having dead thinking is that compulsion element has been withdrawn. So what's happening in the philosophy of freedom? He's pointing out that pure thinking is dead abstract thinking, which I think that was the big surprise to me, and that was the find that you made. But if you read those parts in I've forgotten which chapter it is now. Yeah, it's chapter 9, the idea of freedom. Chapter 9, the idea of freedom. So, very shortly after he's defined pure thinking, he then he just slips in. It's like one sentence, and it's so hugely significant, but it's so easy to like skip over it and think, that's just another sentence. But what he's saying is that these dead thoughts that live within us, we bring them to life by bringing our own volition into them. That's when they become morally productive. Morally really just means imbued with will forces. There's none of this judgmental valuation aspect about morality that we often associate with in English. In philosophical terms, the moral life is the life of the will. And he adds that in there. So it's saying that these thoughts are brought to life through moral intuition.
Right.
Yeah, perhaps if I leave it there as a start. I don't know if I said something that leads to further questions, or whether you want to pass it over
Well,
to
it
Rhonda.
does lead to further questions, but I want to bring it back to asking Rhonda. Okay, so Rhonda, when did you first realize that you had an aversion to abstract thinking and it was being used by these globalist organizations?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying I realize that I'm really not clear in my own understanding of what exactly is abstract thinking. And that was all very interesting what you just said, Angus. Um, and also, I found it very valuable, Brooke, what you said the other day to me, which is that I'm very strongly, you didn't say it. I know I'm adding the strongly, I'm strongly wanting to pronounce moral judgments on a concept that I have not yet really defined. Is that fair?
The
Yeah.
concept being abstract thinking.
Yes. And I appreciate that you gave me that clarity because it's very true, you know. And so it helped reel me back a little bit from this kind of quest I've been on. Like, abstract thinking sucks. What's wrong with it? What is wrong with it? Why are people engaging in it? And to maybe answer your question more directly, when I became aware of a particular instance in my own life, is when it came home to me something is very amiss here. And that was during the first part of the COVID years when a close friend um, said that not unless until I got vaccinated, I he would not play music with me.
Right.
So that
Why why
go
is
ahead.
that abstract thinking? Or how does that connect to abstract thinking? Because the statement itself is not abstract.
Yeah, here's how. Uh, I'm a little speechless at this moment because it contains so much,
Yeah.
that demand that he made, and it really was a pivot for me
Mm-hmm.
in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that what is contained therein that's abstract is this abstract, would you call it? It's a phrase that's abstract, which is we're all getting vaccinated for the greater good.
Right.
So, that is something that has a lot of, it has some layers for me,
Mm-hmm.
that statement. And all I can say calmly is, I don't understand things that way.
Yeah.
That's not how I understand things.
Right.
And I don't agree with your premise.
Mm.
So,
And for the greater good has been used in so many situations over the decades, at least, that we can, think back to. I had seen it used somewhat recently in some energy politics, which is one of my sub hobbies. It's more like anti-energy politics. It's my sub hobby, but in Maine, and I had been trying to use internet search, which is now all AI, to find reference to how for the greater good had been used by so many dictators, and I felt like it had been scrubbed, and it now only would give results that had to do with utilitarianism, which in and of itself is, I people who have a belief in the spirit might find it very problematic, but it's not necessarily associated with dictatorships. Yet I would be interested to know if either of you have other references to for the greater good used in dictatorships.
Angus?
Can yeah, it's, okay. It's a quickish answer to that, more in terms of search strategies, actually. So, I mean, I'm wondering how you're doing it,
Yeah.
and then I'd like to um, like develop further what we've been talking about
Yeah.
in relationship to the other fantastic lecture that you found,
Yeah.
337B, because that is so rich.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of meat that we can get, which immediately brings us to modern day. This was written in 19, I can't remember the date, probably 20s or something like that. But wow, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how relevant it is today. Anyway, so greater good. Um, one of the things that I've noticed with AI is it obviously clearly has certain guardrails. It also depends if you're actually using a so like just using it in Google search, or
Mm.
whether you go to, for example, DeepSeek or Claude or Gemini and actually perform the search there. One of the experiences that I've had is when I push back strongly, and I have to give specific examples.
Yeah.
then it actually recognizes and starts playing along with me,
Oh,
supporting the research. But its
wow.
instinct is there are certain
Yeah.
instincts which um, I remember actually having a conversation with it. I can't remember how it actually started, but it was about this idea of conspiracy theories
Yeah.
in a very specific sense. And it sort of like said, so, but this is like just an conspiracy theory. And then it said, so like, so it said why you have to be careful. And I pushed back and said, hold on, you're saying there's not evidence for this, it's conspiracy theories, but um, intelligence agencies work on the basis of a need to know basis or plausible deniability. And it said, oh, yeah. You've got a point there. So, like, so how do we even resolve this conspiracy issue? And then I pointed specifically. I don't know if either of you have read the book, The Economic Hitman
Yeah.
by
Yeah, totally.
So I gave that as an
Yeah.
example, and it's sort of like after that, it's sort of like it didn't roll over, but it
Right.
was capable of giving both sides of the conversation. But I had to give it
Yeah.
a huge nudge to get that. Um, but it would be interesting, so like if you persisted with a greater good. I think that this type of information can be gotten out of them, but they have guardrails have been put in place to stop the casual, non-determined researcher. Okay, there's
Yeah.
nothing here, type
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
I mean, I would just say without very much real knowledge, or because I haven't done any research, just kind of casual knowledge that many people might have, which is it seems to me that the theories behind Marxist thought and socialism and communism contain a pretty foundational level of this abstract thought that we set up things according to what's for the greater good.
Yeah. And so that could bring us to GA 337B, which Rhonda
Mhm.
found, and lecture one, the consequences of abstract thinking in social issues. So I understood that as in the simplest form. You remove the human being as an individual and you remove the spirit, and you will inevitably, you will not be founded in reality. So all your abstract utopian visions that come out of whatever communist, socialist, Marxist, or any utopian vision will
Yeah.
be not founded in reality and will fail and harm people.
And just to put one sentence to it, that came out of that lecture, caring about everyone in theory, but no one in particular.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that I could say that's the same COVID experiences that the thoughts I had over and over. And in that example I already gave, which is okay, here's somebody standing in front of you that you know for 20 years and that is your friend that supposedly you love, yet you care about theoretical people that aren't in the room right now, not me.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, without going into more details, there are reasons beyond just philosophical that I'm not taking this
Yeah.
this injection.
Right.
But that's not important to you. You don't care what it would do to me, which is just
Right.
kind of amazing. It's so amazing to have that experience personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you were reduced to a category, to use more language from this lecture.
Hmm.
And this reduction of human being from individual I spirit to category is the hallmark of, well, so much of what happens in our world today. Angus, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You got the first on my list. There's 4 points that I want to sort of like
Yeah.
lift out of this lecture. And the first one was categories, because he points out that in Marxist Leninism, I think is actually the term he uses in there. text, but it's this idea that so there are strata in society, and I mean, first of all, when I was reading this and like mulling it over, it's sort of like, are we revisiting the caste system here?
Mm-hmm.
It's like putting people into categories.
Yeah.
That people, it's a wanting to divide people up into convenient denominations. I mean, you can think of like churchy
Mm-hmm.
words as well there, and assume because of the denomination, the class that they belong to, you know exactly what their psychology is, you know exactly what their thinking is, you know what their values is. So they are empty concepts where the experts presume to know what is contained in them. And there's two interesting things here. One's a detail from Steiner's own life, and then bringing it into modern politics, which I think is interesting here. Steiner actually, before he started giving his lectures to the Theosophical Society in Berlin, he was giving lots of lectures to the worker class.
Oh, before.
So he was deeply involved and engaged in this idea of educating the working class, which actually comes in an indirect way. We can link that to a later point in the lecture that he makes when we come to point 4. But how does this relate to modern day politics? Well, isn't this the essence of what identity politics is?
Yeah.
It's the same problem. People identifying with a label, but this here it's used by people to consciously divide populations up, rather than trying to remind humanity we are all human beings with different psychologies, but nevertheless the common desires of a good life and a happy life. But no, what we're going to do is we're going to point out all the difference and try to get people to see themselves through a specific identity rather than their common identity. So I see what, if we look at identity politics, it's Marxism,
Mm-hmm.
squared or to the power 3 or whatever.
And it's only
From my
possible in
perspective.
that context. It's only possible in that context where you are not seeing a human being as an individual spirit. That's what I keep coming back to. It's like, but then, especially from the anthroposophical point of view, once you start delving into the human individual spirit, you come to the Christ incarnation, and that's why it becomes so impossible for many modern, globalist oriented or secular oriented people.
Although I think even for modern secular, even atheist people, there are still a lot of things that could be done.
Yeah.
And it is quite simply that it's rather than emphasizing all the differences between us, you highlight where we actually have common causes. And these are, so what are the common causes of the Americans?
Right.
Genuine ones, it's taken from genuine and not biased surveys that are trying to assess what do Americans really want.
Right.
Yeah. And this is obviously what the politicians play to, but then when they get into power, then they aren't held to those, and they go deliberately against them.
Yeah.
You can correct my understanding here as a European, it's a very a biased or one-sided view of American politics. But one of the reasons Trump was popular because he said no wars.
Oh, correct. And the other reason
So
was
how did that land?
Yeah,
exactly.
I know.
Yeah.
But he was willing to not act like, and it was probably an act. He was willing to not act like the blue collar or the working class was lower. He was willing to, speak in a speak in a pattern of speech that was, not academic.
And also stand for values that the Democrats used to stand for.
Hmm.
They used to be the party of the
Right.
blue collar, didn't they? Which is
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. And I think someone told me recently that he felt that really ended with NAFTA, which was the early 90s, North American Free Trade Agreement. And I was intrigued to hear that analysis. And it makes sense. I remember going into a factory of a sewing contractor in the early 2010s and seeing that they still had a no NAFTA sign up on the wall. And this was in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
And so that's 10, 15 years later, perhaps.
This is, now I'm confused about where I wrote this down from. But anyway, as an example, yeah, the the abstraction of losses, right? I was looking up this whole thing. What does abstraction mean? That's an example. A particular example is abstraction of loss, right? So concrete losses are dismissed as necessary for theoretical global gains, right? So, for an example, the statistical benefit of lifting millions out of poverty in developing nations is an abstraction to a working class family who loses their job to outsourcing.
Right.
One
Right.
example. And then then it's this interesting thing, global good as a kind of mathematical thing, statistical.
And that would be utilitarianism,
Mm,
perhaps.
mm.
Or it's this other fact, which Steiner talks about in different places, not in these lectures, the ability to, how statistics themselves are such an abstraction and can be so easily misunderstood
Yeah,
or misused.
manipulated. Yeah, for your to serve your agenda.
Mm-hmm.
There's just one final point on the categories, which for like more Steiner nerds is like actually really quite interesting, I think. Yeah, so if we think of categories, Aristotle had his 10 categories, and this was basically the guiding principle of philosophy for 2,000 years. So categories is a way of dividing things up. Put very simply, actually, the Greek apparently means accused, which is also a synonym for the devil, the accuser, or Satan, which is a strange sort of like coincidence. But specifically in relation to Steiner, um, I, I can't remember when or where I read this, but Steiner somewhere along the line expresses this idea that part of my karma was to undo the mess I'd done. I'm simplifying by by my Aristotelian
Oh,
categories.
wow.
So
Oh, wow.
dividing up the world. So like what happens when the world goes absolutely nuts in dividing up the world? Because this was the essential philosophical, or what, let's put it like this, one of the essential philosophical acts of Aristotle that determined thinking for 2,000 years, simplifying magnificently.
Yes.
But there's, when you sort of see it in that light, and what Steiner is
That's
actually trying to
phenomenal.
achieve in Aristotle is, I think, is really fascinating.
Yeah.
So that brings me to a question, which is like, okay, so we in the West had to forget about reincarnation for a period of time, a millennia or so, in order to go through an evolution of consciousness. Similarly, perhaps we also had to go through that categorization, analytical, in order to transform it into whatever it comes next. Because,
We can't have
yeah,
freedom without abstract thinking.
yeah,
It's like one of the basic statements that he asserts in the philosophy of freedom.
yeah.
We cannot acquire free thinking if we haven't first experienced dead thinking.
Mhm. So that brings me to a question which, Angus, you might know the answer to. My You have done much. You read fluently in German and speak fluently in German, and you've done much more study of the philosophical texts, and possibly more study of the German idealistic tradition. And so, this term "pure thinking," first, that is part of a tradition, right? Is it connected to Kant?
Uh, I need to be careful here.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding that it's not called pure thinking, but it's what Kant is referring to with a priori thinking. So one of the things that you discover in philosophy is that it's like there are multiple different names for the same phenomena with very slight nuances, but it is there from Kant through Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel. This idea of um, purely conceptual,
Mm-hmm.
something that is yeah, I'm going to have to revert back to
Okay.
the descriptions I gave earlier. A thinking that reveals the truth but doesn't compel
Yes.
the individual human being. Yeah, sorry, I'm not. I don't feel as if I can give a very good answer to that question.
That's fine. So, what I want to connect it to is, I don't have a strong background in philosophy. And we did this amazing study group at the beginning of COVID with my family and some friends. And we read Steiner's first 7 books in order, which are philosophical texts. And because of the way, if you're unfamiliar with the philosophical tradition in German, the way the term pure thinking comes across to the American ear, it sounds like it must equate to the term living thinking. And so I felt like, I think we were misunderstanding. I don't think we misunderstood in general, but I think there are aspects of misunderstanding that we encountered because Steiner's saying pure thinking and we're thinking, oh, he means like that's living thinking. That's what we need to be aiming at. And it seems like that's really not the point here. The point is living thinking is this, the Urpflanzer or the archetypal thinking, or the ability to perceive these thought forms that are always moving and are self forming and are real and have a compelling aspect to them, which I guess most of us can't actually perceive anymore.
Exactly. I'm looking to see
Yeah,
if I can find the specific. I can find the specific line in the text where it would be
please.
so easy to draw exactly the conclusion that you've, because he's
Yeah,
parked pure thinking almost next to the words moral intuition. I'll see if I can find a sentence. It's like
yeah,
if you ask Gordon a question
yeah,
or something like that.
yeah. I'll keep going on this. So in
Yeah.
GA 215, one of the notes that I wrote down is philosophy, which uses the true philosophy, which uses the etheric body to do its thinking, used to be real in the time of the Greeks because they perceived their etheric body. And so Steiner gives the analogy, it would be as if we stopped perceiving our physical body. And so breathing became something that we, no longer had certainty about. But in this case, we are at a stage in life where we have mostly stopped perceiving our etheric body, at least as something that we can individually identify. And so we have a poor ability to understand if we're even starting to do etheric thinking or not. Rhonda, did you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I did read that, but I just can't say I really understood what that means.
What do you think it means?
Yeah, shall I repeat the sentence I just uttered? Um, I mean, I say it over and over, but like anything that I read from Steiner, I trust in him, and I don't have criticism or like contrarian thoughts, but I just do wonder what that feels like
Mm-hmm.
to be aware of your etheric I I have an idea and not know that I have an idea, of that? I did, the breathing thing, approach something that I could almost grasp,
Yeah.
that example
Yeah.
that he gave. But maybe just because I read it kinda quickly and I didn't really stop to think about it, I can't say I
Hmm.
even really fully took that in.
Yeah. Angus, did you find your line?
I did, and it's clarified the pure thinking bit. I'll read the patch and
Yeah.
the relevant part and then comment on it. So he says the high stage of individual life is the conceptual thinking without reference to a specific perceptual content. We determine the content of a concept out of the conceptual sphere through pure intuition. Such a concept initially contains no reference to specific percepts. If we enter into willing under the influence of a concept referring to a percept, that is to say, a mental picture, then it is this percept that determines our willing through the detour of conceptual thinking. If we act under the influence of intuitions, abstract thinking, dead thinking, pure thinking, then the motive power of our action is pure thinking. Okay, since it is customary in philosophy to designate the capacity for pure thinking as reason, we are fully justified in calling the moral driving force characteristic of this stage practical reason. So what he's saying there is that when we've got a dead abstract thinking, when we've got a representational thinking, or he calls it what was the other term that they used? Well, mental pictures is the
Yeah.
term they use in the text there. These always are connected in some shape or form, either to memory experiences, like
Yeah.
something which is already full of a content. Whereas once we start thinking purely abstractly, then we don't need to refer back to concrete incidents of whatever it is we're talking about there. But this pure thinking is completely inert until we have moral intuition, which we then add to it. There was, yeah. I'll let's leave it at that. I feel
Okay.
I didn't find exactly what I'm looking
Yeah.
for. I in my memory, what I have is the idea is like this is pure thinking, and then sort of like within like a couple of words, he's already talking about a moral intuition, and this is the idea of actually like bringing a active force
Mm.
into this into this pure thinking that in its of itself has no life. So normally when we're thinking, if we think of a specific, let's say we had feeding charity towards others. So we might have the way we experience charity, so like as demonstrated by our parents, for example, and in our formative years, we might understand that to be the only way of sort of like understanding what charity is, rather than a far broader idea of what it is. So we're restricted by the concrete examples that we've been given. Whereas when we are living in pure thinking, we are no longer restricted by like specific examples, and we can then like the concept has the capacity to, let's say, grow inside us, and he introduces later these key concepts of moral imagination and moral technique.
Yeah.
And what are they? They actually connect to the second point that I wanted to talk about with 337. Because one of the points he makes in 337, help me come back to connect the link to moral imagination and moral technique if I miss it.
Yeah.
Okay. So in 337b, one of the things that he points out is that these systems are logically perfect. It's like Marxism on paper is perfect. Yeah. But the problem is they're not actually based in reality. They don't take into considerations like real economic forces. They don't take into considerations like practical realities of it's like what this abstract concept means. This so coming back to moral technique, one of the ways that Steiner describes what moral technique is, it's basically this ability that it's like the knowledge that we have determines the type of solutions we can
Yeah.
come up with to solve a problem. And if we are completely impractical, or to take the example that you talked about last week when we spoke, it's like living on the farm,
Yeah.
you had to learn to think in another way. If you had to like continue to think as a seamstress,
Yeah.
trying to resolve practical problems,
Right.
you could come up with all these theoretical wonders, but to like
Yeah.
if they're not actually based in reality, then your moral technique is useless. Theoretically perfect,
Yeah.
practically useless.
Right.
And then the other part is the moral imagination part, which is actually this creativity. It's like when we create this empty space in us with like abstract thinking, where pictures from experience aren't crowding in and saying it's like charity equals this, working on a
Mhm.
farm equals this, working as a seamstress equals this. When we have stripped it of like direct experience, then actually something new, creative can come into us. And this is how I connect to this question of what living thinking is, coming up with something that you recognize within yourself as an original thought. So it might happen like this. If you meditate, you have a certain content that you're meditating on, and you perhaps work with it for weeks or months or whatever. And then something happens in your thinking, and you make a connection that you had never made before, except it's not strictly you who's making that connection. The experience is, wow, everything that I thought was like all these like different like puzzle pieces unconnected, they come together and form a whole.
Right.
Form a whole. But the experience for oneself is, this is so obvious. Why did I never see it before? It's experienced as religious people would be happy, I think, using the word grace in that
Hmm.
type of situation where something new has come to me that is so obvious in retrospect, and that is something living into me.
Yeah.
It's not. I can't say I produced it myself. All I can just do is say I produced a state of consciousness in which that thought was allowed to present itself to me. But it was the dead thinking, or the empty space, the void that I needed to
Mm.
actually allow that something new to
Yeah.
come in.
Oh, that's lovely. Rondo, what do you want to respond?
It does sound good. I mean, I'm always thinking, I'm trying to come up for myself an example of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Um, so I was wondering about this, and then I'm also trying to listen to you, so that's not easy to be thinking over here about examples and trying to listen to what your words are. But I was wondering, like, I was thinking about a maybe abstract dead thing that would be something like, well, we ought to, we ought to feed people. And then is I was listening to you and very interested in this thing that you're saying, where our past examples of what it means to feed people, for example, might get in the way of a situation uh, that requires a new kind of action or something. I don't know if I understood what you were saying, but
Hmm?
I mean, I'm trying to understand that, because like if I'm thinking of like my upbringing, right? And like lessons that I was taught by my mama, like one of them might be about feeding people actually, but not going out and feeding hungry people in another country. More like anybody that comes to your house or any place where you go. I know that that is a big part of what's often on my mind with people is like, have you got enough to eat? Did you get something to eat? And I don't know whether that's what you're talking about, and like an abstract like the 10 commandments of don't. I mean, it's not abstract to say don't steal, is it? But then it's like, don't take things that don't belong to you. Don't take a pencil. Don't not just, you know what I mean? I'm sorry, I'm not clear in my head, but I'm wanting examples because that's just always what I want.
Well, you and I talked last week about specifically the we should feed people on the global level and how that's abstract, but the example of I'm going to buy a sandwich and bring it to that specific person over there, that's not abstract.
Concrete, yes.
Yeah. And one of the lines from 337B was it's a problem if you move from the abstract to the concrete. But what I could take from that is if you move from the real concrete living reality to the to something more abstracted, that maybe that works. That's a question I'm actually posing. Do you remember that line, either of you? Might
No.
have been in the second lecture. I read that too.
Let me play with a
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah.
So let's imagine we've grown up in the 17th century
Yeah.
and there's never been a food kitchen.
Yeah.
So our mothers have told us like you got to feed people, make sure they don't just like die of starvation. And then new societal like pressures grow up where you've got like all of these people that sort of like are hungry. Let's say it's like after the Wall Street crash or something like that. It's like a genuine crisis where there isn't a historical reference to go back to say how do we solve this type of
Yeah.
situation, and then somebody goes, right, we need to be more organized.
Yeah.
Let's a group of us get together and actually create a food kitchen. All of these impulses in society have like grown organically in that way. They are based in a real problem that society is facing, where they recognize that the previous solutions are no longer working, and then somebody comes along and like suggests something new. I'm thinking about the wonderful work of Alcoholics Anonymous
Yeah.
there. I mean, the genius.
Yeah.
It's like in the simplicity. Um, was it ever in humanity before? I don't know. Perhaps in smaller groups, but I can't remember the name of the guy who was responsible for it. But
Bill.
he's like, say again.
Bill, but I don't remember his last name.
Mm-hmm. But it's a fascinating story. But this is something where somebody's got like real experience to work from.
Yeah.
It's like general experience of life, sees a real problem, and then something new comes to him based out of all the like
Yeah.
different like knowledge and experiences that he has in life, and the actual the concrete situation he is in, to bring about that healing impulse
Mm.
to a lot of people.
That also makes me think of a really interesting point, which one just has to encounter when dealing with all this, the Marxist thinking or the abstract thinking in social context is scale. So one thing about I've never been to
Mm.
an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, but I know obviously how they work. And one thing is it's about individuals gathering in a group in real life and being seen as individuals. And I've also heard this thing, in the US, we have Amish societies. And I've heard this thing, and I don't know how true it is in Pennsylvania, but in the states like Maine or the more remote states where there are several Amish communities, but not like thousands of them, uh, the communities uh, define themselves to be around 150 people. And when it grows larger, they split off and new people move away to it and found a new community. So, what is 150 people? It is a community where you can know everyone and you can see
Mhm.
everyone as individuals and you can care for them as individuals. And so, everything that's happened in our giant United States in terms of social welfare programs has removed the concept of perceiving other people as individuals. And so we have this entire strata now of people, homeless people, people without houses, whatever you want to call it, who I don't even know how many thousands who live in tents, who might move in the seasonal, based on seasonal needs. They are mostly unseen as individuals by other people in the society. It's like a caste system now. And it's so different from what goes on in an Amish community or in a traditional small town where, so even in a small town like the one Rhonda and I know, it's 1,500 people. There's still some ability to know, yet that person, that individual has a problem. I was down at the local grocery store and I was overhearing a conversation. They were talking about, yeah, that specific person has a problem. I want to make sure they have enough to eat. Like, not abstract at all.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah.
what can happen in a small town, and it gets abstracted out by the role of government and social systems in a urban area or in a big system. I'm curious what it's like in Sweden because Americans, left-wing Americans, idealize Scandinavian social welfare programs.
Yeah. It's it's can we park that
Yes,
question? It
yes,
just
I know that's
it's so big.
yeah,
Um, but perhaps one quick pointer.
yeah,
There are many wonderful things about Sweden,
yeah.
without any doubt. But there are also many things about Sweden that would horrify the average American or English person.
Really, or English
Yeah.
person.
Oh, I'm English.
I know you're English, but so
Me.
forgive the American ignorance. Like all of Europe is like Europe to us.
Um, Now, okay, so let's
Yeah.
just take one concept. So in England, we've got the pejorative term of the nanny state. Does
Hmm.
that mean anything to you?
Oh yeah, we have the same term
Oh, this is nanny to the power of 10 state.
in Sweden.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and
But anyway, let's. Yeah.
okay,
Oh,
we'll
sorry,
we'll
go on.
park that. That's
Can I,
something for the
can
future.
I,
Yeah,
um, I hope this is sufficiently relevant.
Nannies can be good. Sorry to interrupt, Rhonda. So, restating my point, nannies can be good,
yeah,
For
but
children.
nannies can be really bad as well.
yeah.
Nannies are for children. Um,
Good
so,
point. Yeah.
um, again, one of the examples I was wondering about that relates sort of to what you said too, Brooke, a minute ago, but that I have often wondered about the whole, what would you call it? You called like societal systems or something, but the news, right? That especially international news that goes traveling to a war torn place and tremendous resources go into bringing, say, me a news story about starving people. And this is people with very expensive equipment and that are 2 weeks somewhere staying in a hotel, which is something I don't even afford, you know. And then I've often wondered, like my whole life, like if you just, instead of spending all that money to tell me that people over here are starving, if you know they're starving, why don't you just go over there and spend all that money and bring a pack of food
Mm-hmm.
and just give it to them? Do I have to know about that? Like, is it helping that I know about that? Because now then I'm going to give to an international aid agency. But then what happens with that? We know what happens with that. 98% of it gets used for either nefarious purposes, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I was thinking, Angus, when you're talking about, like, you gave that example of, oh, we've gone from, well, I've got enough to feed like neighbors, but I don't have enough, so now let's start a food pantry. But to me, what I was thinking when you were saying that is, yeah, like, that's a good thought, but then this is like where the trouble begins. Because, right, anyway, that's probably enough on that.
Yeah. Okay. I want to cover two more modes of thinking. One is what I'll call mathematical thinking, and one is what I'll call creative thinking, or like thinking in the flow. And so those are modern terms. Mathematical thinking is not a modern term, but do you both feel like you understand what I mean when I say mathematical thinking?
Like A plus B equals C.
Yeah, only
Being able to think
using
purely
real numbers,
conceptually.
or
Yeah.
so is it concept? This is my question. I have read some of the scientific lectures from Steiner, like the Light Course and other ones like that, in the past year, and I felt like he was saying mathematical thinking is a clue as to what living thinking will be like, because it is it's perception as opposed to abstraction. Assume we're talking about, let's say, lower maths. We're talking about the type of math that we are familiar with, or geometry, um, where you get the result. You don't come up with the result. I mean, in English, we mostly say, I got this result. So it's like a perception of the correct result. And when you're doing math, at least the way I would experience it, it's a different kind of thinking um, than, I don't know, thinking about what I should eat for lunch.
So restate your question again then.
Do you think mathematical thinking is an analogy, or is living thinking? Or do you think it's abstract thinking?
Um, in his astronomical lectures, the astronomy course lectures, he differentiates. This is just one example, but he differentiates between rational, normal numbers, let's call them,
Mm.
or can be fractions, numbers that we're familiar with, and irrational numbers that can never be reduced to, it's like a ratio, as an exact number, and how that these are essential constants in the universe. And I wonder, it'd be interesting to trace back where you read that,
Yeah.
whether it was in relation to when he's talking about irrational numbers versus rational numbers. Because if it was in that context, I would totally agree.
Hmm.
But when it comes to simple mathematics, if I want to add, so like 1,500 and 2,072, then I don't need to have 3,572 beads on my table to be able to calculate that. I can do it in my head,
Yeah.
because abstractly I've got all the necessary concepts. But also it's fundamentally different from, you use the example of what shall I have for dinner tonight. There are no feelings in mathematics with
Right.
that type of abstract thinking. You
Yeah.
it Feelings and an own will are only going to get in the way. They can never assist the process of arriving at the right answer. So yeah, that's one way I'd start to give an
Hmm.
answer to your question. Is mathematics living thinking? Mostly not, but sometimes yes. Perhaps that would be a nice cop out.
Yeah. Well, I will look for, and we will discuss later, the actual things that I had read. Rhonda, what do you think?
Well, I was just wondering, does anybody know when is counting taught in Waldorf? Because I know that somewhere along the line I've read about the how bad an idea it is, which is how it is in conventional education for little ones, to take a, I don't know, however old, 7-year old, probably younger, 4-year old, and go 1,
Mm.
2, 3, because like what's it connected to?
Hmm.
It it's nothing. So to like in that situation to a little person, um, I would say that's theoretical. These are just words to them until later when you go, I have, what this is a toy truck, and then I have a tractor too, and I have a that, and then if you wanted to go one, with these things in your hands, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Instead of
Right.
just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Say your numbers.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm thinking. I don't know how that relates to answering your questions. Maybe again, yeah, that seems abstract, but then like A plus B equals C, like, this factor, like if you're shooting pool and, this happens and then it happens and that's going to be the result, like that doesn't seem abstract. That's like a way to say that. It's
Right.
a way to say this thing plus that thing equals this result.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't know the answer to the Waldorf teaching question. Do you, Angus?
No, I don't. I don't. I'm going to guess that abstract thinking is definitely delayed until after it's like the approximate age of 7, because the etheric forces are still like um, predominantly working with the shaping of the body, of the physical body. So there would be consequences for acting so like too strongly in that realm. But I don't know. It'd be a lot better to ask
Yeah.
qualified Waldorf teacher like what their thoughts are. It's a huge, huge subject because it's it is also it's Steiner often talks about we will move into a time. Often, I think, might be an exaggeration. He has, on occasion, talked about how we will go away from, we will distance ourselves from labeling things good or bad, and instead
Mm.
talking about them as being healthy or unhealthy. So,
Mm.
in the context of this conversation, what we would try to understand is how might it be healthy to introduce so like simple counting activities to a 4-year-old, but how might it be unhealthy? And then it's out of the knowledge of that you can actually determine what a healthy way forward is. And of course, all of these kids are individuals as well. So one of them might actually benefit from it from an early
Right.
onset, whereas another one might be slightly severely impacted.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, creative thinking or in the flow thinking. I'm using those terms as the same thing. Do they sound like they mean the same thing to you?
Mm.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, just in the flow, the first thing that comes to mind is a kind of I'm I'm tapped into something not coming from me.
Right. So, and I'm thinking of flow state, which is, I'm
Mhm.
sure somebody has defined what the specific brainwave parameters are, but it is a state that everyone experiences from time to time. Rhonda's a musician. I'm sure you've sat there making music and felt flow state,
Yes, yes,
right?
I'm with
So
you.
that's what I'm talking about as creative thinking. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
And so what you said, Rhonda, it's like connected to something else, also implies to me that it's on the path of towards living thinking because it's connected.
And And as a musician, I'm not a musician, but I know you had to do all of your lessons, your dry abstracts, or like repetitions of chords or whatever it was. So you had to like develop these techniques. But once you mastered them, you no longer need to think about them. And then actually something else can live into you.
I was going I was going to say, Angus, that I'm sure what you say is fine. I mean, just in my particular case, I didn't sit any time ever with the dry stuff because I didn't learn music um, through lessons.
Mm-hmm.
I just started right away having fun, playing. But I know if I thought about it, probably I would come to agree with what you said.
Fair
Um,
enough. Yeah.
It it makes me so one of Rhonda's, life themes from my point of view is that there's this desire to do things in a improvisational way. And we see that in some of the Practical Steiner episodes where it's like, I'm going to go into this interview with no research about the person that I'm going to talk to and just see what happens. So it's this very beautiful, like, again, it feels like it's kind of like allowing whatever's living to come to the forward. Yeah. And so I would add that because you also, you write songs and you might not write them down as musical notes, you, of course, had the experience of listening and singing many, 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 many songs before you started writing your own songs, just because all human beings have that experience of
yeah,
hearing and
yeah,
singing. Yeah.
yeah. I'm interested in this topic, and yes, I agree with you that I think that it's probably not very conscious for me. All that time I did spend in the point that you're making, like
Right.
in that mode. I'm sure that that's true.
Okay. So another example. So you can write, can't you, Rhonda?
Hmm. Right, right. I've heard this example from Steiner
Yeah.
which is
Exactly. Yeah.
that you don't remember how you got to be able to write. I mean, I actually do remember sitting there because I love writing, and I remember as a fourth grader or whatever with being taught how to write and make
Yeah.
cursive letters and stuff like that. But yes, it was a matter of a lot of practice.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you're stressing, it can be made enjoyable by by living into the flow, or it can
Mm,
become, or it can be very mechanical, depending on how good a teacher you've got.
yeah. And there are many amazing musicians that, have a very dry background. Like they started for many years doing all this stuff that I never did. And they really do have a lot of tools available to them that I don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other type of thinking that I want to mention, which I think is connected to creative thinking, um, it's this. I had read a biography of Tesla, Nikola Tesla, um, and in it, it's described how, from a very young age, he had this ability that was obviously different from other people, and he could imagine something, and, like a mechanical object, and he would see it in front of him. And when he was young, he was not even able to tell for sure if what he was seeing in front of him was something he imagined or not. And so he could do complex equations because he wrote it all out in his mind on a chalkboard and could perceive the whole thing as if it were in front of him. And as he grew up, he became able to differentiate between what he had imagined and what was reality. But that skill was the reason he could design very complicated or new inventions and then run them in experiments. So when I read that, this book, it was like 2 years ago, I was thinking to myself, okay, that sounds like living thinking. What do you think?
Mm. And just to add one more example, which Steiner gave, and I recently came across it, I don't know where, but he said that Mozart was able to play something that he only heard once because he saw it as a totality.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Mm.
Yeah, so with geniuses, essentially, it seems like they are perceiving the totality of something in a consistent way and able to retain that perception.
Well, Go, you got Angus. Go ahead.
So, something random I picked up on recently when looking at Buddhism. So, Buddhism. Okay, so there are many different forms of Buddhism, and so I'm not sure which specific school I'm talking about here, because there'll be other schools that say no, that's not Buddhism. But this particular one, whose name I don't know, will talk about uh, gods also reincarnating, or that gods die. But what's the essential
Hmm.
mechanic behind it? So, one of the ways of understanding it is that something persists as long as it is willed to exist. You find this, there's a wonderful part in the Bhagavad Gita where sort of like you get also the similar idea that sort of like the whole world is a cosmic thought, it's Brahman's thought, and if he stopped thinking it, the world would sort of like it just like dissolve. Okay, but how does this relate to your specific example with Tesla and perhaps Mozart? I would need time to evaluate that, but certainly with Tesla, when we learn to cultivate our will, we can hold pictures in our head.
Yeah.
But it is a will activity.
Yeah.
And one of the this is one of the reasons why I understand like the fundamental need to practice meditation, because it's an exercising of the will to hold a specific thought. And then someone like Tesla, who's obviously so like got a very interesting so like karmic background, he's mastered it in a way in which he can like he can use his will to like to hold thoughts, and as you say, part of his genius is he can perform these experiments in his head, so he doesn't need to do a however was it 10,000 iterations
Yeah.
that Edison had to do. He runs this in his head and goes, no, that's not going to work, no, that's not going to work, okay, now I've got the answer. There
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
um, so I think will, that you've got this other aspect of will that's central, specifically in Tesla's case. Be interesting to think more about what's going on
Yeah.
with what might be going on with Mozart there, capturing an essence. I'm just like thinking about like ancient Greek concepts like nous, so like the capturing the whole in an instant.
In I just will say, to try to articulate like on a very tiny level, I feel like this is related for example, but I don't know how this could be proved. I mean, it's just maybe just my feeling, which might not be really relevant, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Like if I learn a song that isn't my song, I learn a cover song, I interpret, it's always I have used the language with myself that I'm capturing a spirit. It's the spirit of it
Mm-hmm.
that is important to me. And that's I don't know how to say that what it's like for anyone else. I can't talk about that. But I know that I've heard a lot of people play a lot of covers where I just wonder like what is this that you've done? I never need to hear
Yeah.
that again. And I don't know. I can't say. How could I say? But I feel like maybe it's just a preference of mine. It could just be simply that. Like it could just be a preference.
Mm-hmm.
I fancy, that there is such a thing as capturing a spirit of a song because it it personally speaking, it's not like it comes like that. It requires something. I don't know what it requires, but it requires um some kind of honesty, some kind of like I'm not just doing this because I can, because I know these chords, because I can learn these chords you know, and me, I don't play that well, it's not my thing. I'm not that interested to learn to play very well on the guitar. But I feel like I can capture a spirit without being able to exactly make that chord or bar it quite like that or play the bass notes that they're playing. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, and And some songs I cannot capture. It has happened. And it's a
Huh.
mystery. It's a mystery. I'm like, damn, I just can't capture it. I've tried, and I love that song. I really want to play it and sing it, but I just can't quite do it. It's fine. I can do it, but I won't. I'm not going to sing that song because it's just not right. What I've done
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. That's an interesting. I mean, yeah, doesn't every song, every creative act have some spirit behind it? That makes sense. So it's connecting to the
Mhm.
actual spirit.
I think it does because I've done
Yeah.
music in various ways, and I know that when I don't want to do it, I think that's what's going on.
Hmm.
There's no
Yeah.
attention to that. I don't know. Again, I can't prove that, but something's going on sometimes, like the why is missing or something, like
It ties back to this idea of like trying to connect to the, let's call it the spirit of the moment. So improvisational work, whether it's interview or music, is trying to connect to exactly the spirit of the moment. And
mm,
we can reference Steiner's lectures where he apparently, really spoke to the spirit of the people literally in front of him in that moment and
Mm.
changed the content depending on what he perceived. We've been recording for an hour and 20. Anyone have more
wow.
thoughts they want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
But it sounded like Wanda had something as well. Did you have
Nope.
something there? No,
Nope.
okay.
Thank
So I wanted to cover like two other aspects
Yeah.
of 337B, which I think are worth highlighting with a concrete example, which will like lead
Yay.
to another concrete example. So he's got this example in there where I've labeled it as a conceptual imperative. It's where Steiner talks about the Marxist thinking the proletariat should rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And the problems. So he asked this question: can they rule without training? And I was thinking about like all of these different. I was thinking about affirmative action or positive
Mhm.
discrimination. How this is also a form of conceptual imperative. We're trying to solve society's ills by saying, "This is how we do things,"
Right.
but we don't think through the full consequences. And I was thinking about examples of sort of like how, again, it's like more modern examples of how this is what he's capturing something essential here. It's like when we try to impose solutions on something where we don't have, let's call it the moral imagination and the moral technique, or it's like the
Yeah.
wherewithal and the experience to actually really come up with so it's a lifeless thinking. It's theoretically perfect, but sort of like so devoid of reality that it becomes useless. So one of the first example I thought about was Airbnb. It's like on the surface, do you remember the buzz? It's like the
Yeah.
sharing economy being like the buzzwords like 10 years ago, and
Right.
yet promoted by the WF, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But it's like intuitively you feel, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, why do we need to buy like all of these new things? Can't we sort of like find something like Airbnb or Rent a Tool or whatever service it is?
Mhm.
I don't need to earn things. I'll be
Right.
happy anyway.
Right.
No, sorry. A little bit of sarcasm there. But then we see sort of like what are the consequences in society?
Yeah.
All of these fundamental, these basic decisions that were made, or the starting point for the thinkers, the creators of Airbnb, there is something healthy about it. But then it gets introduced into society where we've got, let's say, rampant capitalism. So
Mhm.
what happens is people start buying up all of
Yep.
these properties in Barcelona and Amsterdam,
Yep.
and so that the people can't afford houses
Hmm.
there anymore. And then you get all the different kinds of problems with which already pre-exist with people sort of like falsely announcing their Airbnbs and ripping people off and all of these type of
Oh,
things.
yeah.
So you've got this concept of a sharing economy, which on the surface sounds wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
but if it's not based in reality, then it can easily leads
Right.
to like really adverse effects. And then I thought, I want a better example, and I began to think about thalidomide or contagan. And this, I actually dug into this a little bit to understand the story a little bit better. But at the heart of the problem of how contagan actually came to be the problem for society that it became, or for pregnant women,
Yeah.
and thalidomide babies, was Grünethal, which was the company that made this. They performed all the necessary safety tests according to what was considered important safety tests.
Yeah. There's the abstraction.
So there's the abstraction. We define safety as this, and this. And basically, they were going off previous experience of other antidepressants which had these sort of like adverse reactions that they didn't want. They said, okay, safety means not doing this and not doing this. Okay, they don't do this
Yeah.
because we looked at them at day 36 and a half. I'll just make it a figure.
Right.
And there was no evidence of that, so we can comfortably say it.
Yeah.
And who was the person, or what? How was it proved? Because it was a 10-year process. What's her name? Kelsey Francis. She was the lady who actually said, "I'm not satisfied with just your safety data.
Mm.
I want real world data.
Yeah.
If you can give me that and you satisfy it, then you can have your approval." And of course, they were never able to prove that. But Kelsey Francis' attitude here is like so central to what Steiner's getting at. What are its actions in the real world?
Yeah.
Don't give me this safety narrative as if that is a catch-all for everything.
Yeah.
It isn't. And of course, we can think of other examples where exactly the same thing
Yeah.
has
Many.
happened.
Many.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing, I mean, it just feels like it goes back to these large governmental systems allow this abstraction out of responsibility. And, or a person could say the capitalist influence on the governmental systems encourages the refusal of responsibility because there's an opportunity for these drug companies or these chemical companies to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'd be.
And yeah,
No,
go
go
on.
ahead, Brooke. Please finish.
Simply that it, and the government, the way I view it is the government is not following through on their responsibility because they are specifically designed or tasked to protect against the capitalist influence, and yet they are easy to buy out.
I would be interested to just give thought for myself, or if anybody knows already. Can we give examples of like from the direction of where it's good, like okay, we have abstract thinking lets us be free, we can think up stuff freely. Is there an example where like that happened and then it got applied to the real world and it worked? Like, are there any at all examples where this sort of thing works well?
I think the point is it's not supposed to be applied to the. Angus disagrees. It's not supposed to be applied to the real world. It's to give us freedom because we have to go through that stage. But what does Angus want to say? Yeah.
Think of any mechanical feat.
You think that's abstract thinking?
You mean it's
Absolutely. So let's say all of the computers that we and the screens, these are all the fruits of abstract thinking.
Well,
Without abstract thinking, we would not have technology.
I
This
think
type of technology.
let me just say what's
Wow.
more
Okay.
specifically what I mean is good for humans. The
Yeah,
human, when it worked out well for the human being,
Okay, so do you think sewing machines are bad for humans? Let's go simpler, than a
me,
computer.
me,
Yeah. I don't think sewing machines are bad. I think they're
right.
you
They seem good. Yeah.
so let's stepping back from computers because there's a whole social influence there. Um, if we consider human beings are intended to go through evolution of consciousness, and that's beneficial and healthy, then some parts of the evolution of consciousness are going to involve technologies coming into being. And we I'm pointing at things like, clothing manufacture because it's familiar to me, but also because it is we need to be warm. We need to cover our bodies for the most part. And in our climate, we absolutely have to. And we enjoy the spiritual expression of creative self through clothing. So I perceive, or I think of technological objects as not abstract thinking. I think of them as perception. And I think of invention as perception and
Mm.
creative thinking as perception. So that's something that we should draw out. And again, I have to leave in 10 minutes. So
Yeah.
this might not be something we can draw out today, but I would really like to know if we can define
we
whether
can follow
it,
up
yeah,
Love it.
because there's a whole host in engineering and
yeah,
mechanics, all of these abstract concepts that are fundamental for being able to design
yeah.
so many different things. Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Did you have a fourth topic, Angus?
I did have a
Yeah,
fourth,
go
which I
ahead.
would like to dwell on because again, this will take us back to Steiner, the philosophy of
Yeah,
freedom. So he makes this really important point. He talks about how it's Vargas, isn't it? Is the name
yeah,
of the professor that he's talking
Right.
about? Varga, that's right. Yeah. And for a Marxist Leninist, was it ideology, morality, and culture are all just smoke. They are epiphenomena because the real phenomena is economic. And Steiner points out that, but even Varga here realizes that his thinking might be a little bit off because he talks about having to have the right personalities. It's like in place. And this is really important in thinking in general because the term for this in philosophy is performative contradiction. You're saying that everything is this, and then you're
Mm.
carving out exceptions,
mm-hmm.
which really reveal that this isn't all this is. It's far richer, it's far more complicated than it's made out to be. So that the attempts to simplify are false. But this is actually a technique, this performative, sorry, there's not two T's in there. Performative contradiction is one of these techniques that Steiner used repeatedly in the philosophy of freedom. I don't know if you've noticed, because I don't know how many times, but what he's brilliant at this. He states whether it's Spencer or whether it's about how the eye works or whether it's Schopenhauer and the will. He says, this is what they think. And then he says, but hold on, we have to rethink this because if what they are saying is true, then this means this, that, and the other, which are not consistent with the results of what they're claiming. And how can I? I'm wondering if I can give a clear example. Nothing's coming to mind specifically at the moment in enough detail so that I can flesh it out. But performative contradiction, when the person arguing a point makes these claims and then doesn't sort of like say, okay, let's sort of like review this whole thinking process based on the conclusions that I've done. then they've only done half the job, or they're not completing their thinking.
Right.
And it's good to try and get. It's difficult, but it's good to get into the habit of, okay, if you've led me through a series of like propositions and conclusions, and then I just sort of like say, must be true.
Right.
But Stein will say, okay, now let's sort of like go back and reapply. If that's true, and we apply that to his whole thinking process, what do we arrive at? And if it's a contradiction, then it means it is flawed.
Yeah.
That's great because I'm sitting here going, yeah, if they haven't done the second half of their work, then they're blah, blah, blah. And who cares what you're saying? Because am I supposed to do that work for you? So, what would be good for me, actually, it would be a great exercise to go through these UN agenda, abstractions and or look up, has somebody done that work? Has somebody thought that through for them? Because I'm guessing not, but I'm so aggravated, I should try to do that because that might be a good exercise to, help me get through that.
Right. And I think
There's a lot to chew on for you there, Wanda.
I know. You think what, Brooke?
lots of small organizations have said, here's what'll happen if the UN agenda X, Y, or Z is played out.
I'm gonna look that up.
And so then we want to get into who holds the power and why and what to do about that.
Yeah.
Because yeah. So that's a topic for another time. This has been so fun, guys.
It's been great.
Okay,
Yeah,
we will follow up with everyone. Kind of think through what are the questions you're left with, and then we can reconvene in a week or two. And don't
Sounds
after I press end recording, don't go away.
okay.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Brooke.